They thought creating fake, intimate images of the quiet girl in the back corner and spreading them across every social media platform would be just another digital prank in their endless campaign of psychological warfare. Jake Morrison and his crew of tech-savvy tormentors had no idea that the shy 17-year-old they'd been systematically humiliating for months had spent the last 5 years mastering the brutal ground-fighting techniques of Luta Livre, a martial art so effective it was banned from most competitive circuits. When Derek Williams cornered Emma Rodriguez in the empty computer lab after school, demanding she confess to being the freak in the doctored photos while Madison Foster live-streamed for their followers, they triggered a response that would leave all 4 bullies tapping out on the classroom floor within 90 seconds. This is the story of how one quiet girl's hidden skills turned a moment of digital assault into a confession these privileged predators would never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning mist clung to the foothills surrounding Cedar Valley, Colorado, as Emma Rodriguez navigated her older Honda Civic through the winding roads toward Westfield High School. The dashboard clock displayed 7:45, giving her just enough time to slip into the building before the hallways filled with the usual chaos of teenage social dynamics. At 17, Emma had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through her junior year like a ghost who attended classes, completed assignments, and avoided the spotlight that seemed to burn anyone who attracted unwanted attention from the wrong crowd. Her backpack contained the standard academic supplies alongside a carefully curated selection of oversized hoodies and long-sleeved shirts designed to minimize any physical attributes that might draw commentary. The strategy had worked reasonably well for most of her high school career, allowing her to maintain decent grades while staying below the radar of the social predators who ruled Westfield's complex hierarchy. Emma's natural intelligence had earned her placement in several advanced courses, but she deliberately downplayed her capabilities to avoid the academic spotlight that often made students targets for harassment from those who resented intellectual achievement. The Rodriguez family had moved to Cedar Valley when Emma was 12. Following her father's deployment overseas and subsequent decision not to return to civilian life. The transition had been particularly difficult for Emma, who found herself navigating a new school system while dealing with the emotional complexity of an absent parent and a mother struggling to maintain stability for 2 children. Maria Rodriguez worked double shifts at the regional medical center while pursuing her nursing degree, leaving Emma and her older brother Carlos to manage much of their daily routine independently. Carlos had adapted more easily to their new environment, using his natural athleticism and outgoing personality to integrate quickly into Westfield's social structure. His success on the varsity soccer team had provided some social protection for Emma during her freshman and sophomore years, but his graduation the previous spring had left her exposed to the predatory attention of students who viewed family connections as temporary shields rather than permanent protection. The subtle harassment had begun almost immediately after Carlos departed for Colorado State University on a partial athletic scholarship. Emma's relationship with technology was complicated by necessity rather than choice. While most of her peers used social media platforms as extensions of their social identities, she maintained minimal online presence, specifically to avoid providing ammunition for potential tormentors. Her Instagram account contained fewer than 20 posts, mostly family photos and landscape shots from hiking trips with her mother. She avoided TikTok entirely and used Snapchat only for private communication with her few close friends. The digital restraint that her peers interpreted as social awkwardness was actually a carefully calculated defense strategy born from watching other students become victims of online harassment campaigns. Westfield High School occupied a sprawling campus that reflected Cedar Valley's economic diversity, serving students from both the affluent hillside neighborhoods and the working-class communities closer to the highway. The architecture blended modern educational design with Rocky Mountain aesthetic elements, creating an environment that photographed well for district promotional materials while concealing the social tensions that simmered beneath its polished surface. The student parking lot showcased this economic divide clearly, with luxury vehicles belonging to students from wealthy families parked alongside older, practical cars driven by those whose families prioritized function over status. Emma parked in her usual spot at the far edge of the lot, choosing distance over convenience to minimize interactions with the social groups that congregated around the more prominent parking areas. Her morning routine included a careful assessment of the social landscape visible through the main windows, identifying potential trouble spots and planning alternate routes through the building if necessary. The skill had developed through months of observation and occasional painful experience with hallway confrontations that left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. The main building's entrance buzzed with the controlled energy typical of any high school morning, but Emma's trained eye automatically cataloged the subtle signs of brewing conflict. Jake Morrison stood near the trophy case with his usual entourage, their body language suggesting coordination around some planned activity that would likely involve public humiliation of a selected target. Madison Foster held court near the main staircase, surrounded by followers whose attention focused on whatever content she was displaying on her phone. The convergence of these two power centers rarely resulted in positive outcomes for students outside their protected circles. Emma's defensive instincts had been sharpened through years of careful observation and occasional direct experience with Westfield's predatory social dynamics. She understood that students like Jake and Madison operated according to calculated strategies designed to maintain their social dominance through systematic intimidation of perceived threats or convenient targets. Their methods had evolved beyond simple physical confrontation to encompass sophisticated digital warfare that could destroy reputations and emotional stability without leaving obvious evidence of deliberate harassment. The first period bell provided Emma with an excuse to move quickly toward her advanced placement biology classroom, avoiding the lingering groups that formed natural hunting grounds for social predators. Her teacher, Dr. Patterson, had established clear academic expectations that created somewhat safer environments for students who preferred educational focus over social maneuvering. The structured classroom environment offered Emma 90 minutes of relative peace, where intellectual engagement replaced social navigation as the primary concern. However, even the sanctuary of academic focus couldn't completely shield Emma from the whispered conversations and sideways glances that suggested something significant was circulating through the school's underground communication networks. Several classmates avoided eye contact in ways that indicated knowledge of information they felt uncomfortable sharing directly. The pattern was familiar from previous harassment campaigns she had witnessed targeting other students, suggesting that someone had become the focus of coordinated social assault designed to destroy their reputation and emotional stability. During the transition between first and second periods, Emma noticed increased activity around Jake Morrison's. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Group, with multiple students checking their phones and sharing reactions that ranged from shocked amusement to uncomfortable concern. Madison Foster appeared to be coordinating response strategies with her followers, their animated discussions suggesting involvement in whatever digital campaign was generating such widespread attention. The energy felt predatory and excited in ways that typically preceded major social destruction events. Emma's second period advanced mathematics class provided another temporary refuge, but the atmosphere throughout the building continued to feel charged with anticipatory energy that made concentration difficult. Several students received text messages that prompted immediate phone checking, followed by expressions ranging from horrified fascination to guilty entertainment. The pattern suggested viral content spreading through social networks faster than official school communication channels could track or control. By third period, the whispered conversations had become more obvious, with students openly discussing something shocking that involved digital manipulation and explicit imagery. Emma's defensive instincts went into high alert as she recognized the hallmark signs of a cyberbullying campaign reaching critical mass. The excitement in voices discussing the situation carried the cruel satisfaction that characterized mob mentality when directed against selected victims who lacked social protection or institutional support. The realization that she might be the target of whatever digital assault was generating such widespread attention hit Emma with the force of physical impact. Her careful strategies for maintaining invisibility and avoiding conflict had been insufficient protection against determined predators with technological skills and social influence. The quiet girl who had spent years perfecting the art of blending into the background was about to discover that some battles couldn't be avoided through strategic withdrawal and defensive positioning. As Emma prepared for the confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable, she felt the familiar surge of controlled awareness that accompanied moments of genuine threat. The 5 years of intensive Luta Livre training that her classmates knew nothing about had prepared her for situations where retreat wasn't possible and defensive action became necessary for survival. The shy, invisible student they had chosen as their victim possessed capabilities that would soon transform their predatory confidence into desperate submission. The lunch period at Westfield High School had transformed into a digital battlefield where smartphones served as weapons and social media platforms became ammunition depots. Emma Rodriguez sat alone at her usual corner table in the cafeteria, her untouched sandwich growing stale as she stared at the screen of her phone with mounting horror. The images that had been circulating since early morning were sophisticated enough to fool casual observers, but devastating enough to destroy any teenager's reputation and emotional stability. Her face had been seamlessly grafted onto explicit photographs using advanced artificial intelligence software, creating realistic-looking intimate images that appeared genuine to anyone lacking technical expertise to identify the manipulation. The craftsmanship was undeniably professional, suggesting access to expensive software and considerable skill in digital manipulation techniques. Someone had invested significant time and effort into creating multiple variations of the doctored photographs, each one more humiliating than the last. The images had been strategically released across multiple social media platforms simultaneously, ensuring maximum distribution before any reporting mechanisms could remove them. Emma's Instagram account had been tagged in hundreds of posts, her Snapchat had been flooded with screenshots, and her name was trending on the local Twitter hashtag that students used to share gossip about their classmates. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating in ways that physical assault could never achieve. These images would exist forever in digital format, potentially surfacing years later to damage her college applications, job prospects, or personal relationships. The violation felt more intimate than any physical attack because it targeted her identity and dignity in ways designed to create lasting trauma and social isolation. The perpetrators had weaponized her own image against her, turning her face into an instrument of her own humiliation and degradation. Emma's hands trembled as she scrolled through the endless stream of comments, reactions, and shares that accompanied each posted image. The responses ranged from cruel mockery to false sympathy, with many students expressing shock while simultaneously spreading the content further through their own social networks. Some comments questioned the authenticity of the images, but these voices were quickly drowned out by those who either believed the photos were genuine or simply didn't care about their veracity as long as they provided entertainment value. The technical sophistication of the manipulation was what made the attack so particularly insidious. These weren't crude cut-and-paste jobs that obviously fake amateur attempts at digital harassment. The lighting, skin tone, and facial expressions had been meticulously matched to create seamless integration between Emma's face and the explicit source material. Whoever had created these images possessed advanced knowledge of photo editing software and artificial intelligence tools that were typically available only to professional designers or serious hobbyists, with expensive equipment and extensive training. Emma recognized the strategic brilliance of the attack, even as it destroyed her emotionally. The perpetrators had chosen their timing perfectly, releasing the images during lunch period when maximum numbers of students would be online and available to view and share the content. The simultaneous multi-platform distribution ensured that removing the images from one site would be meaningless, as long as they remained active on others. The viral nature of social media meant that screenshots and downloads had already preserved the images beyond any possible removal efforts. The cafeteria around her buzzed with whispered conversations and barely concealed phone activity as students shared reactions to the circulating images. Emma could feel eyes upon her from every direction, some sympathetic but most carrying the morbid curiosity that accompanied social disasters. Several students had approached her table as if to offer support, but their body language suggested they were more interested in observing her reaction than providing genuine assistance. The spectacle of her humiliation had become entertainment for bored teenagers seeking drama to enliven their mundane school day. Maria Rodriguez had taught her daughter to face challenges with dignity and courage, but nothing in Emma's 17 years had prepared her for this level of coordinated psychological assault. The violation felt more personal than physical attack because it targeted her identity and future prospects in ways designed to create permanent damage. These images would follow her beyond high school, potentially affecting college applications, employment opportunities, and personal relationships for years to come. The perpetrators had weaponized modern technology to create a form of harassment that previous generations could never have imagined. The most disturbing aspect of the situation was the realization that someone had been planning this attack for weeks or possibly months. Creating images of this quality required extensive preparation, including obtaining high-resolution source photographs of Emma and acquiring or developing the technical skills necessary for sophisticated digital manipulation. The coordination across multiple social media platforms suggested careful strategic planning rather than impulsive teenage pranking. This was psychological warfare conducted with military-level precision and tactical sophistication. Emma's phone continued buzzing with notifications as friends, acquaintances, and strangers shared their reactions to the spreading scandal. Some messages expressed genuine concern and offered support, but many others carried undertones of accusation or judgment that suggested the senders believed the images might be authentic. The most painful responses came from adults in her life who had seen the images and were struggling to address the situation appropriately. Her mother had already called twice, her voice strained with worry and confusion about how to handle such unprecedented circumstances. The institutional response from Westfield High School had been predictably inadequate and bureaucratic. Principal Thompson had sent a generic email about cyberbullying policies and appropriate social media behavior, but offered no specific assistance for students who had become victims of digital harassment. The guidance counselor's office had left a voicemail suggesting Emma schedule an appointment to discuss coping strategies, as if therapeutic conversation could somehow undo the viral spread of manipulated intimate images across the entire student body's social networks. Emma understood that traditional authority figures were essentially powerless against this type of technological harassment. School administrators could impose disciplinary measures against students who shared the images on campus, but they had no jurisdiction over social media platforms or students' personal devices. Law enforcement might eventually become involved if the harassment escalated to criminal levels, but the investigative process would be lengthy and complex, while the damage to Emma's reputation continued spreading exponentially through digital networks. The sophistication of the attack suggested involvement by someone with professional-level skills in digital manipulation and social media strategy. Emma's mind raced through possible suspects, focusing on students who possessed both the technical capabilities and social motivations necessary for such an elaborate harassment campaign. Jake Morrison immediately emerged as the most likely candidate, given his known expertise with video editing software and his history of creating viral content for his social media platforms. His followers included several students who worked on the school's digital media team and had access to professional-grade editing equipment. Madison Foster represented another potential threat vector, with her extensive social media influence and demonstrated willingness to destroy other students' reputations through coordinated online campaigns. Her network of loyal followers could facilitate rapid distribution of harmful content while providing plausible deniability for the original source. The combination of Jake's technical skills and Madison's social reach would create a formidable alliance capable of orchestrating exactly the type of sophisticated attack that Emma was experiencing. The psychological isolation was perhaps the most devastating aspect of the entire situation. Emma had always been somewhat solitary by choice, but now she felt genuinely alone, in ways that went beyond simple social preference. The viral nature of the images meant that virtually everyone in her social environment had seen them, creating a shared knowledge that poisoned every potential interaction. Even well-meaning friends and acquaintances would now associate her face with the explicit content, making normal social relationships impossible to maintain. Emma's appetite had disappeared entirely as the reality of her situation continued to crystallize. The sandwich that her mother had carefully prepared that morning remained untouched as waves of nausea accompanied each new notification on her phone. The familiar cafeteria environment now felt hostile and threatening, with every conversation potentially focused on her humiliation and every glance carrying judgment or pity. The safe spaces that had previously provided refuge from social stress had been contaminated by the viral spread of her digitally violated image. The afternoon classes loomed ahead like additional stages in a gauntlet of public humiliation that she would be forced to endure. Every classroom would contain students who had seen the images. Every hallway would echo with whispered commentary about her situation. And every teacher would struggle with how to address the elephant in the room that was affecting their students' ability to focus on academic material. The violation had transformed her entire educational environment into a hostile territory, where she could never again feel truly safe or comfortable. As the lunch period drew to a close, Emma realized that passive endurance would not be sufficient to survive this assault on her dignity and future prospects. The perpetrators had declared war using weapons of digital humiliation and social destruction, calculating that their victim would be too shocked and isolated to mount any meaningful resistance. They had chosen their target based on assumptions about her passivity and vulnerability that failed to account for capabilities they knew nothing about. The quiet girl they had selected for destruction possessed skills that would soon transform their predatory confidence into desperate submission and public confession. The Iron Wolf Academy occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district of Cedar Valley, its exterior deliberately nondescript to avoid attracting attention from casual observers or local authorities who might question the legal status of the combat training that occurred within its concrete walls. Emma Rodriguez had discovered this underground sanctuary 3 years earlier when a chance encounter with Coach Antonio Martinez had changed the trajectory of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. The Brazilian instructor had immigrated to Colorado following a career as a professional mixed martial artist, bringing with him knowledge of Luta Livre that had been refined through decades of real-world application in both competitive and street fighting environments. Luta Livre translated literally as free fighting, but represented something far more sophisticated than simple brawling or recreational martial arts instruction. The discipline had evolved in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro as a practical fighting system designed for situations where traditional rules and sporting limitations were meaningless obstacles to survival. Unlike Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with its emphasis on GI-based techniques and formal competition structures, Luta Livre focused on no-GI grappling that could be applied regardless of clothing or environmental circumstances. The system emphasized submissions, joint locks, and positional control that could neutralize opponents regardless of size or strength advantages. Emma's introduction to this brutal and effective fighting style had begun during her freshman year, when she witnessed a group of older students harassing a disabled classmate outside the school library. Her intervention had been purely instinctual, motivated by moral outrage rather than any confidence in her physical capabilities. The confrontation had ended with Emma sporting a black eye and bruised ribs while the bullies faced minimal consequences from school administration more concerned with avoiding negative publicity than protecting vulnerable students. The experience had taught her that good intentions without practical skills were insufficient preparation for a world where predators operated with virtual impunity. Coach Martinez had observed the aftermath of that failed intervention and approached Emma with an offer that initially seemed too good to be genuine: free training in exchange for help with gym maintenance and occasional translation services when Spanish-speaking clients needed assistance with English-language paperwork. The arrangement had seemed suspicious at first, given Emma's previous experiences with adults who offered seemingly generous deals that inevitably carried hidden costs or expectations. However, Coach Martinez had proven to be exactly what he claimed to be: a dedicated instructor whose primary motivation was sharing knowledge that could help young people protect themselves and others from predatory behavior. The training regimen had been brutal from the very beginning, designed to break down Emma's preconceptions about fighting and rebuild her understanding from fundamental principles that prioritized effectiveness over appearance or traditional martial arts philosophy. Coach Martinez had served multiple tours in the Brazilian military before pursuing professional fighting, and his instruction reflected hard-won knowledge about what worked in life-or-death situations versus what looked impressive in controlled sporting environments. The lessons emphasized mental preparation as much as physical technique, teaching Emma to assess threats accurately and respond with precisely calculated force designed to achieve specific tactical objectives. Luta Livre training sessions began with conditioning exercises that built functional strength rather than cosmetic muscle development. Emma learned to move her body weight efficiently through space, developing the core stability and flexibility necessary for ground fighting techniques that required precise positioning and leverage application. The cardiovascular demands were extreme, simulating the oxygen debt and adrenaline effects that accompanied real combat situations. Coach Martinez insisted that his students train under conditions of physical and mental stress that would prepare them for the chaotic reality of actual conflict rather than the controlled environment of sporting competition. The technical curriculum progressed systematically through increasingly complex submission techniques that could be applied from various positions and against different types of resistance. Emma mastered basic joint locks that could control or injure opponents through precise application of leverage against anatomical weak points. She learned chokeholds that could render attackers unconscious within seconds when applied correctly, along with the physiological knowledge necessary to apply these techniques safely during training while understanding their lethal potential in real situations. The instruction emphasized efficiency and conservation of energy, teaching students to achieve maximum effect through minimum expenditure of physical resources. Mental conditioning represented an equally important component of Emma's development as a Livre practitioner. Coach Martinez taught his students to remain calm under extreme pressure, using breathing techniques and mental visualization exercises that had been adapted from military training protocols. Emma learned to suppress natural panic responses that could interfere with tactical decision-making during confrontational situations. The psychological preparation included exposure to realistic scenarios, where students practiced applying techniques against resisting opponents who used verbal intimidation and psychological pressure tactics similar to those employed by actual predators. The underground fighting circuit that Coach Martinez had participated in during his younger years provided Emma with opportunities to test her developing skills against opponents who fought without the safety restrictions imposed by official sporting organizations. These informal competitions occurred in warehouse spaces similar to the Iron Wolf Academy, attended by audiences who appreciated technical skill and mental toughness more than flashy demonstrations or entertainment value. Emma's participation had been carefully managed by Coach Martinez, who ensured that she faced opponents appropriate to her skill level while gaining experience with the psychological pressure that accompanied real combat situations. Emma's natural athleticism and intellectual approach to learning had accelerated her progress through the Livre curriculum at a pace that surprised even Coach Martinez. Her ability to analyze opponent behavior patterns and adapt techniques to specific situational requirements demonstrated understanding that typically required years of experience to develop. The combination of her analytical mind and increasingly lethal physical skills created a fighter who could assess threats accurately and respond with devastating effectiveness while maintaining the composure necessary for tactical decision-making under extreme stress. The financial arrangement that allowed Emma to afford professional-level instruction had evolved over time, as her value to the gym's operations increased proportionally with her developing capabilities. Her translation services had expanded to include helping Coach Martinez with business correspondence and social media management for the gym's growing online presence. Her maintenance duties had progressed from basic cleaning to assisting with equipment repair and facility improvements that demonstrated her mechanical aptitude and attention to detail. The work provided Emma with spending money while ensuring that her training could continue despite her family's limited financial resources. Emma's mother remained largely unaware of the specific nature of her daughter's extracurricular activities, understanding only that Emma participated in some form of martial arts instruction at a local gym. The deliberate vagueness had been necessary to avoid conversations about safety concerns and liability issues that might have prompted Maria Rodriguez to prohibit her daughter's participation in such potentially dangerous training. Emma's physical conditioning and increased confidence had been attributed to general fitness activities rather than specialized combat instruction designed to produce highly effective fighters capable of neutralizing multiple opponents in close-quarter situations. The secret nature of Emma's martial arts development had created an interesting psychological dynamic where she possessed lethal capabilities that were invisible to her school environment. Classmates who viewed her as a vulnerable target for harassment had no awareness of her ability to defend herself with techniques that could cause serious injury or death if applied without restraint. The contrast between her public persona as a quiet, academic-focused student and her private identity as a dangerous fighter created cognitive dissonance that Emma had learned to manage through careful compartmentalization of her different social roles. Coach Martinez had emphasized the ethical responsibilities that accompanied advanced fighting skills, teaching his students that their capabilities should be used only when absolutely necessary for protection of themselves or others who could not defend themselves adequately. The instruction included extensive discussion of legal implications surrounding self-defense actions, helping students understand when force was justified and how to document situations appropriately for potential legal proceedings. Emma had internalized these lessons about proportional response and escalation management, understanding that her skills represented tools for protection rather than weapons for aggression or revenge. The psychological benefits of her Luta Livre training had been as significant as the physical capabilities she had developed over 3 years of intensive instruction. Emma's confidence in her ability to protect herself had reduced the anxiety and hypervigilance that previously characterized her navigation of potentially threatening social environments. The knowledge that she could defend herself effectively had allowed her to focus on academic and personal development, rather than constantly worrying about her physical safety in situations where predatory behavior might occur. However, Emma had never anticipated facing the type of sophisticated digital assault that was currently destroying her reputation and emotional stability through viral distribution of manipulated intimate images. Her martial arts training had prepared her for physical confrontations and direct threats, but offered limited protection against technological harassment that operated through social media platforms and digital manipulation software. The realization that her carefully developed defensive capabilities were essentially useless against this new form of attack had been psychologically devastating in ways that physical assault could never achieve. The evening training session at Iron Wolf Academy had become Emma's only refuge from the ongoing digital nightmare that was consuming her life and reputation. The physical exertion and mental focus required for technical instruction provided temporary escape from the endless notifications and social media commentary that accompanied the viral spread of her violated image. Coach Martinez had noticed her emotional distress but respected her privacy enough to avoid prying questions about personal problems that she might not be ready to discuss with anyone. As Emma prepared for what might be her final training session before the situation at school forced her family to relocate or transfer to a different educational environment, she realized that her Luta Livre skills might yet prove relevant to her current crisis. The perpetrators of her digital humiliation would eventually need to confront her directly to achieve their ultimate goal of complete social destruction and psychological domination. When that confrontation occurred, they would discover that their carefully selected victim possessed capabilities that would transform their predatory confidence into desperate submission and public confession of their crimes. The Rodriguez household had always operated on carefully managed chaos, with schedules coordinated around Maria's demanding work shifts at Cedar Valley Regional Medical Center and Carlos's college coursework that required constant video calls and study sessions. Emma's role in maintaining family stability had expanded significantly since her brother's departure for Colorado State University, leaving her responsible for household management tasks that ranged from grocery shopping to coordinating repair appointments for their aging appliances. The additional responsibilities had been manageable when her school life remained relatively stable, but the current crisis threatened to disrupt the delicate balance that kept their family functioning despite limited financial resources and time constraints. Maria Rodriguez possessed the kind of quiet strength that had sustained single mothers throughout history, but her daughter's current situation presented challenges that fell outside her considerable experience with crisis management. As a medical professional, she understood trauma and its psychological effects, but the digital nature of Emma's harassment created complications that previous generations of parents had never faced. The intimate images circulating through social media platforms represented a violation that was both deeply personal and completely public, creating shame and exposure that traditional support systems were inadequately prepared to address. The conversation that Emma dreaded most had occurred the previous evening when Maria returned from her late shift to find her daughter sobbing over her laptop in the kitchen. The manipulated photographs had been shared across so many platforms that they were impossible to avoid, appearing in Maria's own social media feeds tagged by concerned friends who wanted to alert her to her daughter's situation. The technical sophistication of the digital manipulation had initially convinced Maria that the images might be authentic, leading to a painful discussion about Emma's personal relationships and sexual activity that revealed the depth of her mother's confusion about the situation. Emma's attempts to explain the concept of artificial intelligence photo manipulation had been complicated by Maria's limited familiarity with advanced technology and social media platforms. The idea that someone could create realistic-looking intimate photographs using nothing more than facial recognition software and publicly available images seemed like science fiction to a woman whose professional responsibilities left little time for staying current with rapidly evolving digital trends. The generational gap in technological understanding had created an additional barrier to meaningful communication about a crisis that was fundamentally rooted in modern, digital capabilities. The financial implications of the harassment campaign had become apparent, as Maria researched legal options for addressing the digital assault on her daughter's reputation and emotional well-being. Attorneys who specialized in cyberbullying and online harassment charged consultation fees that exceeded the Rodriguez family's monthly discretionary income, while the litigation process could potentially last months or years without guaranteed successful outcomes. The cost-benefit analysis was further complicated by the likelihood that the perpetrators' families possessed significantly greater financial resources and legal representation than the victims they had targeted for destruction. Emma's relationship with her older brother Carlos had always been characterized by protective affection and mutual respect, but the geographical distance created by his college attendance had limited their communication to brief phone calls and occasional text message exchanges. Her reluctance to burden him with her current crisis reflected both concern for his academic responsibilities and embarrassment about the intimate nature of her harassment situation. Carlos had been her primary defender during their early years in Cedar Valley, using his social connections and athletic status to shield Emma from potential bullying, but his protective influence had disappeared when he graduated and left for university. The decision to finally confide in Carlos had been prompted by Emma's growing isolation and her mother's obvious inability to provide practical guidance for navigating such unprecedented circumstances. The video call had been arranged for a time when his roommate would be absent, allowing for privacy during what Emma anticipated would be an emotionally difficult conversation about topics that neither sibling was comfortable discussing. Carlos's reaction to the situation had been immediate and visceral, cycling through shock, rage, and protective concern, before settling into strategic problem-solving mode that reflected his developing maturity and leadership capabilities. Carlos Rodriguez had inherited their father's analytical mind and their mother's emotional intelligence, creating a personality that combined practical problem-solving skills with genuine empathy for others' struggles. His success at Colorado State University had resulted from methodical preparation and disciplined execution rather than natural talent, demonstrating work habits that had been developed through years of supporting his family during difficult circumstances. The news of his sister's harassment had triggered protective instincts that he struggled to channel constructively given the physical distance and technological complexity of her situation. The brotherly advice that Carlos provided during their lengthy conversation had focused on documentation, institutional advocacy, and strategic thinking about long-term reputation management. His experience navigating university social dynamics had taught him valuable lessons about handling conflicts that could affect academic and professional opportunities for years into the future. The perspective he offered reflected understanding that Emma's current crisis required careful strategic planning rather than emotional reactions that might provide temporary satisfaction while creating additional problems for her future prospects. Emma's academic performance had begun deteriorating in ways that would have long-term consequences for her college application prospects and scholarship opportunities. The concentration required for advanced coursework was impossible to maintain, while constantly monitoring social media platforms for new instances of her violated image appearing across different networks. Teachers who had previously viewed her as a dedicated student were beginning to notice her distraction and declining participation in classroom discussions, but none possessed adequate training for addressing the complex psychological effects of technological harassment on academic performance. The guidance counselor's office had become a refuge of sorts, but Ms. Walsh's well-intentioned support was limited by institutional policies that prioritized legal liability protection over meaningful intervention in student conflicts. The school district's cyberbullying protocols had been designed to address simpler forms of online harassment rather than sophisticated digital manipulation campaigns that operated primarily through off-campus social media platforms. The jurisdictional limitations meant that Westfield High School could only address behavior that occurred on campus or during school-sponsored activities, leaving students vulnerable to external harassment that affected their educational environment. Emma's employment at Iron Wolf Academy had provided both financial independence and emotional stability that became increasingly valuable as her school environment grew more hostile and uncomfortable. The gym's clientele included adults who understood discretion and professional boundaries, creating a work environment where Emma's personal problems remained private unless she chose to share them. Coach Martinez had noticed her recent emotional distress but respected her autonomy enough to avoid intrusive questions while making it clear that support was available if she needed guidance or assistance with any situation affecting her well-being. The psychological coping mechanisms that Emma had developed through years of Luta Livre training were being tested in ways that she had never anticipated when her instruction began. The mental discipline required for effective martial arts practice included emotional regulation techniques that helped practitioners remain calm under pressure, but the sustained nature of her current crisis created stress levels that exceeded the brief intensity of physical confrontations. The knowledge that she possessed defensive capabilities was less comforting when facing an enemy that operated through digital platforms rather than direct physical threat. Emma's social isolation had become nearly complete, as former friends distanced themselves to avoid association with the scandal surrounding the viral images. The few classmates who attempted to maintain supportive relationships faced social pressure from peer groups that viewed continued friendship with Emma as potentially damaging to their own reputations and social standing. The toxic nature of viral harassment campaigns created collateral damage that extended beyond the primary victim to include anyone who refused to participate in the collective shunning that typically accompanied such situations. The sleep deprivation resulting from constant anxiety about new image appearances and social media commentary had begun affecting Emma's physical health in ways that compromised her training performance and academic functioning. The hypervigilance required for monitoring multiple platforms and managing crisis communications left little mental energy for the restorative processes that occurred during deep sleep cycles. The cumulative effects of chronic stress were beginning to manifest in physical symptoms that included headaches, digestive problems, and muscle tension that interfered with her martial arts practice. Emma's faith in institutional protection systems had been systematically destroyed through repeated encounters with administrators, counselors, and authority figures who offered sympathy but lacked practical tools for addressing technological harassment that transcended their jurisdictional boundaries. The realization that she would need to rely primarily on her own resources for resolving the crisis had been both terrifying and liberating, forcing her to acknowledge capabilities and responsibilities that she had previously avoided confronting directly. The transition from victim mindset to tactical planning represented a psychological shift that drew upon every lesson she had learned through years of intensive combat training. The evenings spent reviewing social media activity patterns and identifying potential evidence trails had revealed the sophisticated nature of the harassment campaign that was destroying her reputation and emotional stability. The coordination across multiple platforms and the technical quality of the image manipulation suggested resources and expertise that exceeded typical teenage pranking behavior. Emma's analytical review of the attack's methodology had provided valuable intelligence about her adversary's capabilities and strategic approach, information that would prove crucial when the inevitable direct confrontation finally occurred, and her hidden skills could be applied to achieve justice and accountability. The confrontation that Emma Rodriguez had been dreading finally materialized on a gray Thursday afternoon when the autumn sky hung low over Westfield High School like a suffocating blanket of impending storm clouds. The computer lab had been strategically chosen by Jake Morrison and his accomplices as the perfect location for their final assault on Emma's dignity and psychological stability. The isolated room provided privacy for their planned humiliation while offering multiple digital devices that could be used to broadcast their victims' breakdown across social media platforms in real time. The lab's location in the school's oldest wing ensured minimal foot traffic during after-school hours, creating the controlled environment that Jake's group required for their culminating act of psychological warfare. Emma had arrived at the computer lab under the pretense of completing a research assignment for her advanced placement history class, but her true motivation was the desperate hope that she might find evidence of the digital manipulation campaign that had destroyed her reputation and social standing over the past week. The school's computers possessed forensic capabilities that could potentially reveal metadata or digital fingerprints linking the manipulated images to specific user accounts or editing software installations. Her plan was methodical but dangerous, requiring her to remain in the building after most students and faculty had departed while conducting investigative work that could provide legal evidence against her tormentors. The lab's fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across rows of desktop computers that hummed with electronic efficiency, creating an atmosphere that felt both sterile and oppressive. Emma had positioned herself at a workstation near the back corner of the room, providing maximum visual coverage of entrance points while minimizing her visibility to anyone entering the space. Her backpack contained digital storage devices and documentation materials that she hoped to use for preserving any evidence she might discover during her covert investigation of the harassment campaign that had transformed her educational environment into a hostile battlefield. Jake Morrison's entrance into the computer lab was preceded by the distinctive sound of expensive sneakers squeaking against polished linoleum flooring alerting Emma to the approaching danger several seconds before her primary tormentor became visible. His confident stride and predatory smile indicated that this encounter was neither accidental nor spontaneous, but rather the carefully orchestrated culmination of a harassment campaign designed to achieve complete psychological domination over his selected victim. The timing of his arrival suggested surveillance and planning that confirmed Emma's suspicions about the sophisticated nature of the attacks she had been enduring. Madison Foster followed Jake into the lab with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to making dramatic entrances for maximum psychological impact. Her designer clothing and perfectly applied makeup created a stark contrast to Emma's utilitarian appearance, emphasizing the social and economic disparities that had initially made Emma an attractive target for harassment. Madison's smartphone was already positioned for optimal recording angles, indicating that the upcoming confrontation would be documented for social media distribution regardless of its outcome or the psychological damage it might inflict on the victim. Ryan Campbell's imposing physical presence filled the lab's doorway as he entered third, his athletic build and aggressive posture, designed to intimidate through the implicit threat of violence rather than explicit verbal confrontation. His role in the group's hierarchy was clearly that of physical enforcer, providing muscle and intimidation, while allowing Jake to maintain plausible deniability about any overtly threatening behavior. The combination of psychological manipulation and physical intimidation represented a sophisticated approach to bullying that maximized victim trauma, while minimizing legal exposure for the perpetrators. Derek Williams completed the group's tactical formation by positioning himself near the lab's main exit, effectively blocking Emma's most direct escape route, while maintaining visual contact with the hallway to monitor for potential interruptions from faculty or staff members. His nervous energy and constant phone manipulation suggested that his primary responsibility involved documentation and communication rather than direct confrontation, but his strategic positioning demonstrated understanding of tactical principles that indicated previous experience with coordinated harassment campaigns. Emma's initial response to finding herself surrounded by her tormentors was a carefully controlled assessment of her tactical situation, rather than the panic or emotional breakdown that Jake's group had anticipated and planned to exploit. 3 years of intensive Luta Livre training had conditioned her to remain calm under pressure while rapidly evaluating threats and available response options. The lab's layout provided both advantages and disadvantages for potential defensive action, with multiple escape routes balanced against confined space that could limit movement options during physical confrontation. Jake's opening gambit was delivered with the practiced cruelty of someone who had refined his psychological attack techniques through years of successful harassment campaigns against vulnerable targets. His voice carried the mocking tone that had become familiar to Emma through a week of social media commentary and hallway whispers. But the intimate setting allowed for more explicit verbal assault than public environments had previously permitted. The combination of personal attack and sexual humiliation was designed to provoke emotional response that could be recorded and weaponized for future harassment campaigns. Well, Emma Rodriguez, Jake began with theatrical sarcasm that emphasized his perception of complete control over the situation. The star of the internet's hottest new adult entertainment series. I have to say, those photos really captured your best angles. Very artistic work, don't you think? His words were carefully chosen to imply Emma's willing participation in creating explicit imagery, while maintaining technical, plausible deniability about his own involvement in the digital manipulation campaign that had destroyed her reputation and emotional stability. Madison's contribution to the verbal assault focused on social destruction and reputation management themes that reflected her expertise in influencer culture and online personal branding. Her comments were designed to emphasize the permanent nature of the damage to Emma's digital footprint, while highlighting the hopelessness of any attempts to recover from such comprehensive social destruction. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and targeted, demonstrating understanding of the specific vulnerabilities that would cause maximum emotional damage to their selected victim. The whole school is talking about your new career path, Madison continued with false sympathy that made her words even more cruel and cutting. I mean, everyone always wondered what quiet little Emma was hiding under all those baggy clothes. Now we finally get to see the real you. The internet never forgets, you know. These images will follow you forever. College admissions officers, future employers, potential boyfriends. They'll all see exactly what kind of person you really are underneath that innocent act. Ryan's participation in the harassment campaign was more subtle but equally threatening, involving strategic positioning and physical presence that communicated potential for violence without explicit verbal threats that could be documented or reported to authorities. His movement patterns indicated experience with intimidation techniques that operated below the threshold of actionable harassment while creating genuine fear in targets who understood the implications of his behavior. The combination of size, aggression, and coordinated group tactics created psychological pressure that had previously proven effective against other victims. Derek's role as the group's documentarian became apparent as he began recording the confrontation with professional quality equipment that suggested preparation and planning rather than spontaneous harassment behavior. The video would serve multiple purposes, including entertainment for their social media followers, evidence of their victim's emotional breakdown, and potential leverage for future manipulation campaigns. The systematic documentation of harassment activities demonstrated the predatory nature of their behavior while providing evidence that could ultimately be used against them in legal proceedings. Emma's response to the coordinated psychological assault was measured and controlled in ways that surprised her attackers and disrupted their carefully planned script for the encounter. Instead of the tears, pleading, or emotional breakdown that had characterized their previous victims' reactions, Emma maintained steady eye contact and calm breathing patterns that indicated emotional regulation rather than overwhelming distress. Her 3 years of combat training had prepared her for situations involving multiple opponents and psychological pressure tactics that were designed to create confusion and panic. "I know you created those images, Jake," Emma stated with quiet certainty that carried more authority than screaming accusations could have achieved. "The metadata analysis will prove it, along with the software installation records on the school's computers. Digital forensics can trace every step of the manipulation process back to specific user accounts and hardware configurations. You're not as clever as you think you are, and you've left evidence trails that will destroy your lives just as thoroughly as you've tried to destroy mine." The unexpected confidence in Emma's voice created visible uncertainty among her attackers as they realized that their victim possessed knowledge and capabilities that had not been factored into their strategic planning. Jake's expression shifted from predatory confidence to defensive concern as he processed the implications of Emma's technical knowledge and apparent access to forensic analysis capabilities. The possibility that their sophisticated harassment campaign had created evidence trails that could be used against them represented a threat vector that their planning had failed to adequately address. Madison's attempt to regain psychological control of the situation involved escalating the personal attacks to more explicitly sexual and degrading themes designed to overwhelm Emma's composure through sheer cruelty and social humiliation. Her words were chosen to maximize emotional damage while testing the limits of Emma's self-control and defensive capabilities. The escalation represented a tactical error that would ultimately provide Emma with legal justification for the physical response that her training had prepared her to deliver with devastating effectiveness. "Nobody cares about your technical excuses," Madison sneered with venomous satisfaction. "Everyone has seen you naked now. Every boy in school knows exactly what you look like under those clothes. You can cry about digital manipulation all you want, but the damage is done. You're the school slut now, and everyone knows it. Maybe you should just embrace your new reputation and start charging for private shows. You'd probably make more money that way than you ever will with your pathetic academic achievements." The sexual nature of Madison's verbal assault crossed legal boundaries that transformed the harassment from cruel social behavior into criminal activity that justified defensive response under Colorado's self-defense statutes. Emma's training had included extensive instruction about legal frameworks surrounding assault, harassment, and justified use of force in defensive situations. The combination of coordinated group intimidation, sexual harassment, and documented threats created circumstances where physical defensive action would be legally protected and tactically appropriate. Ryan's movement toward Emma's position represented the transition from psychological harassment to physical intimidation that triggered her combat training's automatic response protocols. His approach was calculated to appear casual while closing distance that would limit Emma's movement options and increase the group's tactical advantage during their planned culminating assault. The positioning indicated understanding of basic tactical principles but failed to account for Emma's advanced training in close-quarters combat techniques designed specifically for situations involving multiple opponents in confined spaces. Derek's documentation of the escalating confrontation would ultimately provide crucial evidence of the group's coordinated criminal behavior, while capturing Emma's defensive response for legal and disciplinary proceedings. The irony of their own recording equipment becoming the instrument of their downfall reflected the same technological hubris that had characterized their digital manipulation campaign. Their confidence in their ability to control narrative and evidence would prove to be a fatal flaw in their strategic planning. Jake's decision to join Ryan in physically approaching Emma's position represented the point of no return for the confrontation, transforming verbal harassment into criminal assault that justified immediate defensive action under legal frameworks that Emma understood thoroughly through her training. The coordination between multiple attackers in a confined space activated muscle memory and tactical responses that had been refined through thousands of hours of practice in exactly these types of scenarios. The transition from victim to predator would occur with shocking speed and devastating effectiveness. "Time for you to admit what you really are," Jake declared as he moved to within arm's reach of Emma's position. "We want you to confess on camera that you're nothing but a pathetic attention seeker who probably created those images herself for the publicity. Tell everyone how desperate you are for male attention and how you've been lying about being the innocent victim. Say it now, or we'll make sure this situation gets much worse for you and your entire family." The explicit threat against her family represented the final escalation that removed any possibility of peaceful resolution to the confrontation, while providing legal justification for whatever level of force Emma determined necessary to protect herself and others from continued harassment and assault. Her mother's safety and her brother's college opportunities were now at stake in addition to her own immediate physical security, expanding the tactical parameters of the situation to include protective action beyond simple self-defense. Emma's response was swift, precise, and utterly devastating in its application of 3 years' worth of Luta Livre training to a real-world combat situation. Her movement from seated position to combat stance occurred faster than her opponents could process, utilizing explosive power generation techniques that had been drilled until they became automatic responses to threatening stimuli. The element of surprise was complete, as Jake found himself facing someone whose capabilities exceeded anything he had imagined possible from his carefully selected victim. The first technique Emma employed was a standing arm drag that redirected Jake's forward momentum while simultaneously controlling his balance and positioning him for immediate submission application. The movement was so smooth and technically perfect that observers might have mistaken it for choreographed demonstration rather than real defensive action. Jake's expression of shock and confusion lasted only for the brief moment before Emma's follow-up technique rendered him completely helpless and unable to continue his assault. Emma's transition to a rear-naked choke was executed with textbook precision, applying pressure to Jake's carotid arteries while controlling his body position to prevent escape or counterattack possibilities. The submission technique was designed to render opponents unconscious within seconds when applied correctly, but Emma's training had emphasized control and restraint that allowed for tactical communication rather than immediate unconsciousness. Jake's struggles were futile against properly applied leverage and positioning that multiplied Emma's strength advantage exponentially. "I am Emma Rodriguez," she announced with calm authority while maintaining perfect technical control over her primary attacker. "I've been training in Luta Livre for 3 years under Coach Antonio Martinez at Iron Wolf Academy. You just committed criminal assault and sexual harassment, and every second of it is being recorded on Derek's phone. You're going to confess to creating those fake images, and you're going to provide the evidence that proves your guilt. Or I'm going to demonstrate exactly what happens when trained fighters face multiple opponents in confined spaces." Madison's scream of shock and outrage filled the computer lab as she processed the complete reversal of power dynamics that had occurred within seconds of what was supposed to be their victim's final humiliation. Her phone continued recording automatically as her hands shook with disbelief at witnessing Jake's transformation from confident predator to helpless victim of his own criminally stupid assault attempt. The documentation that was supposed to capture Emma's breakdown was instead preserving evidence of their group's criminal behavior and her legally justified defensive response. Ryan's attempt to assist his leader by advancing toward Emma's position was met with tactical awareness and defensive positioning that demonstrated her training's effectiveness against multiple opponents in realistic combat scenarios. Emma's control over Jake's positioning allowed her to use his body as both shield and weapon while maintaining the chokehold that kept him compliant and unable to coordinate resistance efforts. The technique demonstrated advanced understanding of tactical principles that went far beyond basic self-defense instruction. "Stay back, Ryan," Emma commanded with authority that brooked no argument while adjusting her grip to emphasize Jake's complete helplessness. "I can render him unconscious in 3 seconds or break his arm in 2. Your choice how this escalates, but understand that every action you take is being recorded as evidence of coordinated criminal assault. Move 1 step closer and I'll assume you're attempting to join his attack, which means you'll be treated as an active threat requiring immediate neutralization." Derek's phone trembled in his hands as he realized that instead of documenting their victim's humiliation, he was creating evidence of their own criminal behavior while capturing footage of their leader being systematically destroyed by someone they had assumed was defenseless. The strategic implications were becoming clear, as his technical role in the harassment campaign would be easily provable through digital forensics analysis of his recording and distribution activities. The documentation he had created would ultimately convict them all while protecting their intended victim. Jake's attempts to speak were limited by Emma's precise application of the chokehold, but his gestures and nodding indicated willingness to comply with whatever demands might secure his release from the submission hold that demonstrated his complete tactical defeat. The physical dominance was so absolute that resistance was impossible, forcing him to confront the reality that his carefully planned assault had instead resulted in his own capture and potential serious injury at the hands of someone whose capabilities he had catastrophically underestimated. Emma's training had emphasized the importance of tactical communication during submission applications, allowing opponents opportunities to surrender before suffering permanent injury while maintaining complete control over the situation's progression. Her application of this principle demonstrated both technical mastery and ethical restraint that would be crucial for legal justification of her actions during subsequent proceedings. The balance between effective defense and appropriate force would be clearly documented through Derek's unwitting evidence collection. "Here's what's going to happen," Emma explained with clinical precision, while maintaining her submission hold. "Jake is going to confess to creating the fake images and provide access to all the software and source materials he used. Madison is going to admit to coordinating the social media distribution campaign and provide evidence of everyone who helped spread the content. Derek is going to surrender his phone and all recording equipment so that law enforcement can analyze the digital evidence. Ryan is going to explain his role in the intimidation campaign and identify any other victims you've targeted with similar harassment." The systematic nature of Emma's demands reflected strategic thinking that went beyond immediate tactical considerations to encompass long-term justice and prevention objectives. Her understanding of legal requirements for evidence collection and witness testimony demonstrated preparation that exceeded what would be expected from a typical high school student defending herself against harassment. The comprehensive approach suggested planning and forethought that indicated this confrontation might not have been as spontaneous as it initially appeared. Madison's desperate attempt to regain some measure of control over the rapidly deteriorating situation involved threats about her family's social connections and financial resources, echoing the same privileged entitlement that had enabled the harassment campaign in the first place. Her words revealed the fundamental assumptions about power and protection that had made Emma seem like a safe target for coordinated assault and humiliation. The reality that their victim possessed capabilities that rendered their social advantages meaningless was still sinking in as shock overrode strategic thinking. "My father will have you arrested for assault," Madison declared with diminishing confidence, as she witnessed Jake's continued helplessness and submission to Emma's technical control. "We have connections throughout this district and this community. You can't just attack students and expect to get away with it. This is going way too far now. You need to let him go immediately before this becomes a much bigger problem for you and your family." Emma's response to Madison's threats demonstrated understanding of legal frameworks and social dynamics that reflected maturity and preparation beyond her 17 years. Her analysis of the situation's legal and tactical implications was delivered with calm authority that contrasted sharply with her opponent's growing panic and desperation. The reversal of power dynamics had been so complete that their previous confidence in social protection and family influence was crumbling under the weight of documented criminal behavior and physical defeat. "The only criminal assault that occurred here was your coordinated attack on me," Emma replied, without loosening her technical control over Jake's breathing and circulation. "You coordinated to isolate me, sexually harassed me with explicit verbal threats, physically intimidated me with multiple attackers, and demanded that I confess to crimes I didn't commit while threatening my family's safety. Everything you've done is documented on Derek's recording, and it all constitutes criminal harassment and assault under Colorado law. Your family's social connections won't protect you from federal charges related to distribution of manipulated intimate images. Ryan's continuing attempts to position himself for potential rescue of his leader were met with tactical adjustments that demonstrated Emma's training in multiple opponent scenarios and environmental awareness that maximized her defensive advantages while limiting her opponent's options for coordinated counterattack. Her positioning utilized the computer lab's layout to create physical barriers that prevented flanking maneuvers while maintaining visual contact with all potential threats. The technical expertise was becoming increasingly apparent as her opponents realized they were facing someone with professional-level combat training. Derek's role as unwitting evidence collector was becoming more crucial as his recording captured not only the confrontation itself, but also the surrounding conversations that revealed the extent of the harassment campaign and the strategic coordination that had characterized their assault on Emma's reputation and emotional stability. The digital evidence would prove invaluable for legal proceedings while demonstrating the premeditated nature of their criminal behavior and the sophisticated planning that had preceded their final assault attempt. Jake's submission to Emma's demands began with nodding acknowledgement that escalated to desperate verbal agreement as the pressure on his carotid arteries reminded him of his complete physical helplessness and the serious consequences that would result from continued resistance. His confession started with admission of technical responsibility for creating the manipulated images and progressed to detailed explanation of the software, techniques, and source materials that had been used in the digital manipulation campaign that had destroyed Emma's reputation. "I created the fake images," Jake gasped as Emma slightly loosened her hold to allow clearer speech while maintaining tactical control. "I used artificial intelligence software and deepfake technology that I downloaded from underground forums." The source photos came from Emma's social media accounts and school yearbook pictures. "I spent weeks learning the technical skills needed to make the manipulation look realistic." Madison coordinated the social media distribution through her network of followers, and Ryan provided intimidation to keep potential witnesses from reporting our activities. The technical confession provided crucial details about methods, timeline, and coordination that would be essential for legal proceedings, while demonstrating the sophisticated planning and significant time investment that had characterized their harassment campaign. Emma's success in obtaining this detailed admission reflected both her tactical control over the situation and her understanding of evidence requirements for successful prosecution of digital harassment crimes. The confession would be supplemented by digital forensics analysis that could verify and expand upon Jake's admissions. Madison's breakdown began with angry denials that progressed to desperate bargaining as she realized that her social media influence and family connections were powerless against the documented evidence of her criminal participation in the harassment campaign. Her attempts to minimize her role in coordinating the distribution of manipulated intimate images were contradicted by the digital evidence trails that could be analyzed by law enforcement specialists who understood social media platforms and viral content distribution mechanisms. "I just shared some posts," Madison claimed with diminishing credibility as her previous confident demeanor crumbled under the weight of impending legal consequences. "I didn't know they were fake when I first saw them. Other people were already sharing them before I got involved. I was just commenting like everyone else was doing." You can't prove that I was coordinating anything or that I knew about Jake's technical work. This is all circumstantial evidence that won't hold up in any kind of legal proceeding. Emma's technical knowledge of digital forensics and social media analysis allowed her to systematically demolish Madison's defense strategy while maintaining physical control over Jake's continued cooperation and submission. Her understanding of metadata analysis, platform algorithms, and distribution patterns demonstrated preparation that went beyond basic legal knowledge to encompass sophisticated technical expertise that would be crucial for proving the coordinated nature of the harassment campaign and Madison's central role in its execution. Digital forensics can trace every share, every comment, every private message, and every coordination activity back to specific accounts and devices, Emma explained with authority that reflected genuine expertise rather than bluffing or intimidation tactics. The platforms preserve complete activity logs that include timing, geographic location, device identification, and communication patterns that prove coordination and planning. Your messaging history with Jake and the others will show the strategic planning that preceded the image release and your follower engagement patterns will prove that you used your influence to maximize distribution reach. Ryan's confession focused on his role in providing physical intimidation and threat escalation that had been designed to silence potential witnesses and prevent victims from seeking help from authorities or support systems. His admission revealed the systematic nature of their harassment activities and the extent to which they had targeted multiple victims over extended time periods. The pattern of predatory behavior indicated that Emma's situation was part of a larger campaign of abuse that had affected numerous other students who had been too intimidated to report their experiences. Derek's surrender of his recording equipment and digital devices provided immediate access to evidence that supplemented the confessions, while offering additional documentation of their harassment activities and victim targeting strategies. His technical role in creating and distributing content had generated digital evidence trails that would be crucial for understanding the full scope of their criminal enterprise and identifying other victims who might be willing to participate in legal proceedings against their shared tormentors. The resolution of the confrontation came when Emma's tactical control and strategic planning achieved complete victory over her opponents, while providing comprehensive evidence collection that would ensure successful prosecution and meaningful consequences for their criminal behavior. Her release of Jake from the submission hold was carefully timed to prevent injury while maintaining psychological dominance that would discourage any attempts at revenge or retaliation. The transformation from victim to victor had been accomplished through superior preparation, technical skill, and strategic thinking that had turned her opponent's planned assault into their own complete destruction. Emma's final statement to her defeated opponents emphasized the permanent nature of the consequences they would face, while offering a path toward potential redemption through cooperation with legal proceedings and assistance in identifying other victims of their harassment campaigns. Her words reflected both the authority of someone who had achieved complete tactical victory and the maturity of someone who understood that justice required rehabilitation as well as punishment. The lesson they had learned would extend far beyond this single confrontation to encompass fundamental changes in their understanding of power, privilege, and accountability. "You targeted me because you thought I was weak and defenseless," Emma concluded as she gathered the evidence materials and prepared to contact law enforcement authorities. "You discovered that real strength comes from preparation, training, and moral courage, rather than social status or financial privilege. The digital evidence we've collected today will ensure that your criminal behavior faces appropriate legal consequences, but more importantly, it will protect other potential victims from experiencing the harassment and abuse that you've used to terrorize vulnerable students. Your reign of digital terror is over permanently." The aftermath of the confrontation would extend far beyond the immediate legal consequences to encompass institutional reforms, policy changes, and cultural shifts that would protect future generations of students from the sophisticated digital harassment campaigns that had characterized Jake's group's predatory activities. Emma's victory had been achieved through superior preparation and tactical execution, but its lasting impact would result from the comprehensive evidence collection and strategic communication that had transformed personal defense into systematic justice for all victims of their coordinated criminal enterprise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.